الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. This is part 2 of Seerah as a timeless legacy. In part 1, I discussed how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with the Islamophobes of his time and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised his model as Uswatun Hasana, and how knowledge of the Seerah and the Sunnah are essential to understanding the Quran, and how the Prophet ﷺ's life is intertwined with our life, literally from the cradle to the grave. Now, in part 2, we are going to discuss how we can make a positive outreach to the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, using the model of the Prophet ﷺ. So one of the things that we can do is show gratitude, shukr, to those who have done us favor, because shukr is a very big concept in Islam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that those who do not thank people, they do not thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So imagine the first safe haven for the persecuted Muslims of Mecca was a Christian land. The Prophet ﷺ sent two groups of Muslims from Mecca at a time when they were being persecuted intensely by the kuffar to Abyssinia, Habasha, today's Ethiopia, where a Christian king Najashi was the ruler. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Idhabu ila Najashi, go to Najashi, he is not going to persecute you because of your beliefs." And Muslims lived there for 13 years without being molested, without being persecuted, without their freedom to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being taken away from them. And also, the first person after Khadija radiallahu anha to confirm the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was Waraqa bin Nawfal, who was a cousin of Khadija radiallahu anha and who had embraced Christianity and who knew the scriptures. And when he heard the story of the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "By Allah, you are the prophet of your people, and if I am alive," he was a very old man, blind old man, "if I am alive, I will help you and support you." So the Prophet ﷺ did not forget these acts of kindness, and when he returned, when he made hijrah to Medina, among the first things he did, he had a covenant written up, a charter, a Mithaq al-Medina, in which he included all the people of Medina, and he called them one ummah in the sense of a community. And later on, when the Prophet ﷺ realized, or from his firasa, his understanding, his intuition, or if Jibreel alayhi salam told him that there will come a time when Christians and Jews will live as minorities in Muslim lands, meaning that Islam will cross the Arabian Peninsula and will become a global phenomenon. So the Prophet ﷺ had 4 letters of protection written for Jews and Christians who someday in the future live in Muslim lands. One of those letters was for the monastery of Saint Catherine's in Sinai in Egypt. And when in 2017 ISIS tried to attack them, they pulled out this letter from the Prophet ﷺ and they said, "Look, your Prophet gave us a timeless protection." Also, the fast of the 10th of Muharram is called Yawm Ashura. Did you ever wonder why we fast on this day? This fast falls on the 10th of Muharram, but it has nothing to do with Muharram. It has to do with the freedom of the Jews, the Bani Israel, from the clutches of Fir'aun in ancient Egypt. And when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina and he found out that the Jews are fasting because Musa alayhi salam fasted, and Musa alayhi salam fasted because he was thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for freeing Bani Israel from the tyranny of Fir'aun. So the Prophet ﷺ said that we have more right on Musa and we will fast also. And he said that if I'm alive, I will fast another day besides the 10th. This is an optional fast, but if we were to tell the Jews, especially the Zionists who are committing such atrocities against the Palestinians, the genocide that is happening in Palestine, that look, for the last 1400 years, Muslims have been fasting on the day of Ashura, the 10th of Muharram, to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for your freedom in ancient Egypt. And then also among the cooperation between Christians and Muslims is the story of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the holiest of the holy church in Christendom, and a Muslim family is the custodian of this holiest church. And so how is it possible? So when in 638 CE, Umar radiallahu anh took Jerusalem under Muslim control without a fight, and the key of the city of Jerusalem was given to Umar radiallahu anh, the patriarch of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Sophronius, also gave the key to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to Umar radiallahu anh, and he was surprised that, why are you giving this key to me? And he said, to keep peace among the feuding Christian groups, Franciscan Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, and later on the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So Umar radiallahu anh gave the key to Nusayba family, and since that time until today, this Nusayba family has been taking care of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They are the custodian of this church, and the only time this tradition was broken was when Crusaders took away Jerusalem from Muslim hands. But when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimullah took Jerusalem back from the Crusaders, the key to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was returned to Nusayba family, and to this day they are performing this duty. Also, the Prophet ﷺ showed us to build coalitions with people of other faiths, because in every faith tradition there are good people. So when the Prophet ﷺ is returning from Ta'if, where his message has been rejected and he has been stoned and bloodied, the Prophet ﷺ knows that he cannot return to Mecca, because the news of his treatment in Ta'if has reached or would have reached by the time he reaches Mecca. So he asked 3 non-Muslims in Mecca to give him physical protection. One of them was Mut'im bin Adi, and Mut'im agreed to give protection to the Prophet ﷺ, and he armed himself and he went to the outskirts of Mecca to bring the Prophet ﷺ back into the Haram. And Abu Jahl asked him, are you giving him protection only, or you have believed in Islam? And Mut'im bin Adi said that, I'm only giving him protection. So the Prophet ﷺ lived in Mecca post Ta'if, after his return from Ta'if, until he made hijrah to Medina under the protection of a non-Muslim called Mut'im bin Adi. And then when the Prophet ﷺ has moved to Medina several years later, after the Battle of Badr in the 2nd Hijri, when the prisoners of war are paraded in front of the Prophet ﷺ, he suddenly, out of nowhere, remembers the favors of Mut'im, and he said, لو كان مطعم بن عدي حيا فكلمني في هؤلاء النتنة لتركتهم له. So he said that if Mut'im had been alive today, Mut'im has died already as a mushrik, but his son Jubair becomes a Muslim later on. So he said, if Mut'im had been alive today and he had said one word about these filthy prisoners, I would have let them go, I would have freed them for his sake. So he is returning the debt of gratitude. And also, brothers and sisters, did you know that in the most noble migration in history, the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ, the guide of the Prophet ﷺ was a mushrik, a pagan, a non-Muslim named Abdullah bin Arqat, and the Prophet ﷺ was also supported by another non-Muslim, Amir bin Fuhaira, who was a freed slave of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anh had hired Abdullah bin Arqat because he was honest and trustworthy, and he was the most knowledgeable about the highways and the byways of that area. And Amir bin Fuhaira, he helped in the hijrah in other ways, and later on he became a Muslim. So these are some of the stories that we need to learn about the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Also, the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ taught us that we should stand for the rights of the oppressed people, not just for Muslims but for entire humanity. When the Prophet ﷺ was 20 years old and a full 20 years away from the Risala and the prophethood, he joined a pact along with his uncle, as called Hilful Fudul, Al-Hilful Fudul. And this treaty was to stand for the oppressed the rights of the oppressed people in Mecca, even if they were not from the city of Mecca. And the Prophet ﷺ very fondly remembered this, the joining of this treaty, and he said that after he became a Prophet of Allah, he said that in Jahiliyyah we had joined this treaty, and if in Islam we were ever going to be asked to join a treaty like this, I would do so in a heartbeat. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us. In some years back, in a city called Garland, which is a city next to Dallas in Texas, the United States, there was a fundraiser to raise money to buy some multimedia equipment to spread the noble seerah of the Prophet ﷺ to non-Muslims. And this came a few weeks after the Charlie Hebdo incident in France, where some people had a newspaper cartoonist, or a number of cartoonists have made caricatures of our Prophet ﷺ showing a bomb in his turban, and there was a lot of violence after that. So the word of this fundraiser, which was called Standing with the Prophet in Honor and Respect, this word got around through the social media to Islamophobes, and they came in big numbers to disrupt this fundraiser. I happened to be there, and these Islamophobes came and they were menacing us, they were cursing us, they were insulting us, they were threatening us, and they were insulting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I began to ask myself, what could drive this kind of dislike for our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And the only answer I could find is that because they don't know him. Because history is a witness that those who came to know the noble seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they could not hate him, dislike him any longer. By the Fath of Mecca, the staunchest enemies of Islam, like Abu Sufyan bin Harb, Suhail bin Amr, Safwan bin Umayyah, Ikrama bin Abi Jahl, Khalid ibn al-Walid, all of them came into the fold of Islam because they could no longer deny the nobility of the Prophet ﷺ and the holiness of his mission. So I decided to write a book on the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. It's called Muhammad, son of Abraham, brother of Moses, successor of Jesus. This book has two main goals. The first goal is that we Muslims rekindle and reignite our love for the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. During my book tours in the United States, I have sadly come to know that many Muslims have never read a single biography of the Prophet ﷺ from cover to cover. So the first goal is that we return to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the second goal is that we convey the noble seerah to the non-Muslims, because in the absence of our conveying the noble seerah to them, they are getting information about the seerah and Islam from the wrong sources. And seerah, as Muslims, we should know, we should memorize, we should internalize that there is no way forward for us in dunya or akhirah. There is no way for us to succeed in dunya or akhirah except through the Quran and the seerah and the sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah allows us, gives us tawfiq to walk into the footsteps of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that Allah gathers us, joins us with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in paradise, in the hereafter, in the best abode of paradise, al-firdausul ala. Jazakumullahu khaira. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.